They mocked her for looking too poor to bid. Service staff should use the back entrance, the guard sneered. Clara Jensen stood frozen as laughter echoed across the marble lobby. What no one knew. She was about to make the highest bid of the night and leave them all speechless. What would you do if you were humiliated, then proved everyone wrong? I'm here for the auction, Clara replied softly, producing her invitation from her worn leather satchel. Before the stunned guard could respond, a woman in a crimson designer dress stepped forward, diamonds glittering at her throat. These invitations were clearly meant for serious collectors, she announced, snatching the card from Clara's hand and examining it with theatrical disgust. The help should know their place. These seats, she gestured to the empty chair Clara had approached, are reserved for people with the means to actually bid. She tossed the invitation back as if it were contaminated. Cruel laughter erupted around them. Judged for her plain appearance, Clara stood frozen as the woman's companion, a man in an expensive charcoal suit, added with a smirk. Maybe she got lost on her way to the community college art appreciation field trip. They didn't know the simple woman they mocked would soon own the moment that would define the night. Clara's modest navy dress and practical flats might as well have been a neon sign flashing "doesn't belong," as everyone stared at the simple woman being publicly humiliated. But something hardened within her. Clara straightened her shoulders, reclaimed her invitation, and walked past the guard with quiet dignity. She positioned herself by a marble column at the back of the room, her chin raised despite the whispers that followed her retreat. What would you do if someone mocked you in front of a room full of elites? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. The Langston auction house sparkled with wealth, chandelier light dancing off jewelry, and crystal champagne flutes. Tonight's winter gala featured rare pieces from the Rothschild estate, including an unsigned impressionist painting, rumored to be a lost work by Camille Pissarro. Clara stood alone, ignored by servers who glided past. Her paddle number, 312, was clutched in her slender hand that bore the telltale marks of someone who worked with delicate materials. No one who judged her by appearance could guess this simple woman had spent her life immersed in art. Since childhood, Clara had been her father's shadow in his renowned restoration workshop. The legendary Richard Jensen had taught her to feel the soul behind brushstrokes, to recognize artists by their technique alone. When he died suddenly when she was 18, Clara inherited not just his business, but his unfinished commissions from 3 major museums. Despite being dismissed for dressing beneath the room, she had proven herself with such remarkable skill that for 14 years since her hands had touched masterpieces that museums kept behind bulletproof glass. But tonight they'd written her off without a second glance. What no one could see was that Clara had a personal connection to tonight's mystery painting. In her Brooklyn apartment hung a small reference sketch her father had treasured, drawn by Pissarro himself in the same French village. Her father's final words had been about this lost painting. When it resurfaces, Clara makes sure it's loved for what it truly is. Tonight she would fulfill that promise. The woman in red who had humiliated Clara earlier pointed directly at her. Security should check her bag before she leaves, she said loudly. She probably came to steal the catalog pictures. A quiet woman overlooked and underestimated Clara remained motionless, her face betraying nothing. Then the centerpiece painting was unveiled. The room collectively gasped at the beautiful landscape, soft ochres capturing rural France, with village rooftops emerging from early morning mist. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer announced, lot number 23, Village Morning, attributed to the Impressionist school circa 18 minutes, starting bid $100,000. Paddles flew up around the room, $150,000 from bidder 145, $175,000 from bidder 221, $200,000 from bidder 103. A strange hush fell over the room as the bidding momentarily paused. In this silence, Clara slowly raised her eyes to the painting, studying it with a gaze so intense that several nearby collectors unconsciously followed her line of sight. Suddenly uncertain, the room stilled. Clara adjusted her glasses, raised her paddle, and in a clear, unwavering voice said, 300,000. Heads whipped around in unison, until her bid left them speechless. They had no idea who Clara Jensen really was. The room fell oddly silent. The woman in red blinked rapidly. Did she say 300,000, Audie? Would you have the courage to bid against the wealthy elite? Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something others didn't? Comment below. The auctioneer, momentarily caught off guard, looked toward the back. Yes, bidder. For each 12, $300,000. Do I hear 320,000? A silver-haired collector laughed openly. She probably thinks it's a museum gift shop poster, he said loudly, drawing more cruel laughter. 320,000 came a confident bid from the front row. 350,000, Clara countered, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. The man who had mocked her narrowed his eyes. Who is she? Phones started to appear. Discreet at first, then frantic. Clara Jensen, someone whispered aloud. Wait, this can't be that, Clara Jensen. Gasps, one by one the smiles faded. A few began texting their advisors. The room had just realized they'd laughed at the wrong woman. She doesn't have that kind of money, someone responded with certainty. She's barely 30. Mocked for her simple clothes, they hadn't bothered to ask her name. 400,000, another bidder called out louder this time, as if volume could intimidate Clara into silence. Clara raised her paddle again. 500,000. The room erupted in whispers. Even the auctioneer hesitated. $500,000 going once. The man in the suit jumped in. 600,000. Clara didn't flinch. But then 700,000. She said calmly, her voice carrying an authority that suddenly filled the cavernous space. The simple woman's bid left them speechless. Whispers erupted. Phones came out as people frantically searched her name. A quiet woman overlooked and underestimated minutes earlier had just made the highest bid of the night. 1. Stay quiet and prove them wrong. Or 2. Speak up and defend her worth. What would you do? Clara stood motionless, her eyes never leaving the painting. There was only quiet certainty in her posture. $700,000. Going once, going twice. Sold. The gavel fell with a crack that echoed through the suddenly silent hall. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses. We will of course need verification of payment before proceeding. Nobody believed Clara could actually pay. She proved them all wrong. Before anyone could object, a distinguished older man in a navy suit emerged from a side room and approached the podium. On his lapel gleamed a small gold pin, the emblem of the World Art Registry. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice commanding instant respect, I believe some context is in order. All eyes turned to him as the room went completely still. Bidder 312 is Miss Clara Jensen, daughter of the late Richard Jensen, and now the most sought-after restoration specialist for Impressionist works in North America museums from the Met to the Louvre. Wait months for her expertise. A shocked murmur swept through the crowd. The woman in red visibly paled. Despite her youth, her eye for authenticity is unmatched in our field, he continued. If she just paid $700,000 for this work. He turned toward the hushed audience and smiled slightly. Then I suggest you all adjust your catalog valuations accordingly. This painting will likely be worth 10 times that amount once her authentication is formally registered with our office. The room went dead still. Until her bid left them speechless, they had judged her only by her appearance. The man in the expensive suit who had mocked her looked physically ill, his tanned face ashen as he stared at her with a mix of shock and dawning humiliation. The auctioneer cleared his throat. We are honored by your presence, Miss Jensen. Truly honored. But Clara didn't gloat. She simply walked to the front with unhurried grace, signed the necessary paperwork, and offered only a brief explanation. I recognized the brushwork and the ochre. That pigment-crushed peach pit was used only by Pissarro. In one village, one winter, his hand speaks through every stroke. The man who had mocked her pushed forward through the crowd, his face flushed with embarrassment. Miss Jensen, he said loudly, I owe you a profound apology. My comments earlier were inexcusable. Clara looked at him, her eyes kind but penetrating. I studied what you ignored, she said simply. Those 5 words silenced the elite gentleman completely. Dismissed for dressing beneath the room, minutes earlier, now Clara Jensen commanded the room's complete attention. She proved them all wrong with nothing but her expertise and quiet dignity. You're absolutely right, he admitted. I saw your clothes, not your expertise. I judged your worth by your appearance. He hesitated. Would you be willing to tell me what I missed? Clara nodded, and as she began to explain, the same people who had laughed at her earlier now hung on her every word. The woman in red tried to slip away, but Clara called out to her. You should stay too, she said gently. There's room for everyone to learn. The woman froze, then slowly turned back, shame evident on her face as she rejoined the group, now forced to acknowledge the simple woman she had tried to humiliate. The power dynamics had completely reversed, until her bid left them speechless. They didn't know who she really was. Later that night, Clara returned to her modest studio apartment in Brooklyn. With gentle hands, she unwrapped the small reference sketch her father had given her, drawn by Pissarro himself in the same French village. She traced the delicate lines with her fingertip. In that moment, she felt her father's hand guiding hers once more, not in memory but in purpose. The steady sureness of his touch lived on in her own skilled fingers. She had always known the painting at auction was genuine, but her reason for bidding went beyond expertise. This painting had been her father's obsession. He had spoken of it often in his final days. When it resurfaces, Clara, he had told her, make sure it finds a home where it will be loved for what it is, not for what it's worth. Tonight she had fulfilled that promise. The next morning, Clara's phone rang constantly with calls from museums, publications, and even the man who had mocked her now humbly asking for her expertise. A quiet woman overlooked and underestimated one night had become one of the most sought-after experts in New York by morning. But Clara remained unchanged, still seeing what others missed, still valuing substance over appearance. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the deepest knowledge. Sometimes the one judged most harshly by appearance carries the most valuable insight. And sometimes true worth is found precisely where people have been trained not to look. In one unforgettable evening, Clara Jensen had taught Manhattan's high society the most valuable lesson they'd ever received: that appearances deceive, that knowledge speaks louder than wealth, and that a simple woman's quiet strength can silence a room full of elites who judge by surface alone. She proved them all wrong. As she looked at the sketch one last time before heading to the museum for work, Clara smiled, not in triumph over those who had mocked her, but in quiet satisfaction that the painting would soon be properly appreciated for its true worth, rather than as a status symbol. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. The truth is always in the details others overlook. In a world where success is too often measured by appearances, Clara had chosen substance over show. She had chosen patient study over social climbing, knowledge over display. And in doing so, she hadn't just reclaimed a painting, she had restored a piece of human truth that money could never buy. Have you ever misjudged someone based on looks alone? Tell us your story in the comments. And if Clara's quiet strength inspired you, hit subscribe to Sir Alex Stories, where dignity always speaks louder than diamonds.